What you're looking at right now, the lens we're using, this has never been done before. This is a first. The world's fastest, widest, full frame lens with autofocus. And it's F2.8. Laowa knows that video is a huge part of today's world, so they designed this lens as a hybrid, just as much for photo as it is for video. But how good is the autofocus? Well, here's an example for you. We're at F2.8 on the FX3. Subject shift sensitivity is set to 4. Transition speed is set to 3. We're at F2.8. Hey, listen, I know a lot of you as well watch these videos and you get value out of it to help make your buying decisions, but most of you, you're not subscribed. So I would appreciate it if you just head down there and hit that button. There's no contract, you can cancel at any time. My hand, eye tracking is on. I can see the box on the screen there, getting really close. Now there definitely is some focus breathing. It's not the worst in the world, but just know that there is no way with Sony bodies to improve this because it's not a Sony lens. If you use a Sony lens, you can use focus breathing compensation. This is a third-party lens, so it will not work with that. Now it's really hard to explain just how wide 10mm is. This angle down here, the one we're using, this is a 16mm. Let's swap this out to this lens so you can see just how wide it really is. So now we are on the 10mm F2.8 Laowa. It's incredibly wide compared to that 16. It is a extremely different look to anything you've probably seen before. Let's shoot with this down here just as a friendly reminder now and then how wide 10mm really is versus what we have up here on the FX30, 35, 10. Now typically with super wide lenses like this, you can't put filters on it. You can with this. You can somewhat see it. I'm using a step-up ring, so maybe that's why, but here you go, you'll see what I mean. Actually, let's fix that exposure first. Let's drop down to this. And now you'll see, with a Punbund on here, 2-5, and a 72 to 82mm step-up ring, you can see it a little tiny bit, but you could definitely get away with this cropping in post. So that's what it looks like with just the step-up ring on there. A lot less obvious. And when it comes to the lens hood, you actually have to make sure that it is on properly, otherwise you will see it. That is the lens hood not on properly. And then that is with the lens hood on properly there. It's also worth pointing out just how far away this lens is from me right here, so you have reference. 33 inches, but it is also worth pointing out how small the minimum focus is on this lens, 1.2 centimeters. And because it has that crazy minimum focus distance and that 10mm field of view, you can get some pretty interesting shots of both photo and video. You're typically getting a bit closer than you normally would be able to get when you're this wide, and the fact that it doesn't distort the lines, they're all straight. Which makes it kind of fun to play about with because we rarely have lenses that are different. We normally have like an f2.8 or a different focal length, but 10mm is very different to what we're used to. Now the really interesting thing with this lens is that it is a zero distortion lens, 0D Laowa calls it. This is a huge thing that Laowa is known for, and it means that you can take pictures of things like architecture and landscape and get that super wide field of view, but none of your lines are curved and makes it look a little bit less real. Prime example right here, the desk, which I didn't think would actually be in frame, but it is. But you'll see that it is almost perfectly straight. Typically with these wider lenses, that would actually be curved because of the distortion that's happening in the lens. Even if you get towards the edges, look, let's put this up here, lines get or stay straight. Every time I put things down, normally I'm used to just this angle and they're out of frame, but anything I'm putting down now is immediately in frame on this angle. Now this is impressively sharp for what it is. Straight in the middle there, this is how your sharpness looks on a few different images. Now as we've already said, it doesn't become distorted towards the edges, but the sharpness does drastically drop off the further you get to the corners and the edges, which is what I'd expect with this. There is some vignetting, which you'll notice in some images more than others depending on what you're taking photos or video of, and there is definitely chromatic aberration depending on the images you take, how close you are to things, the lighting. You'll notice it again in some situations and some photos more than others. I did not have the lens profile corrections at the time of making this video, so I can't say how much of that will be fixed. Now I will say that looking back at some of the things that I shot, depending on what it was, I found myself looking at it and thinking it had a glow or a natural halation. And it could also be because in the middle it's very sharp, and as you get towards the edges it's extremely soft and it loses some of that focus, and when you're really close to it, because of its minimum focus, it's a lot more obvious, more exaggerated. We're going to swap back to the 16 on this now so I can show you some features of the lens. Back on the 16 now, you see you can't see the edge of the table. 16 versus 10 is a big deal. And because it's such a wide field of view, sometimes you think your angle is completely off. It really makes you rethink how your framing should be. Like I'm pointing right down here, but yet this angle still kind of works. So use cases for this lens. What is it for and what is it not for? Is this a lens you would use for vlogging? Well, at first I thought No, it's a little bit too wide. But if you use the active stabilization to obviously make it a little bit more stable, it actually is a pretty good vlogging lens. And I'm not even at arm's length here. This is arm's length. You can just kind of hold it a little bit closer to you, which means you get better sound. So it actually might be a pretty solid vlogging lens. If you wanted to vlog with this on a gimbal, it actually is much easier on your arm, because typically with a gimbal vlogging, you have to hold it out far to get the field of view you want, and it's really tough on the arm, but you can hold it much closer. Like I'm maybe less than a foot away here, and it still works great. And because you're so wide, the footage looks a lot smoother. It's definitely not going to be a portrait lens unless you're going for that style of look, but it is very much a landscape and architecture lens because it has that zero distortion. When you want a super wide look, this is going to give it to you. And I didn't get the opportunity to try this, but this on paper will be a almost perfect astronomy lens. People want wide, people want no distortion, people want fast. It's f2.8. Also to play around with the foreground and the background to have some depth, the minimum focus. On paper, it's a very good astronomy lens, but I think it is a bit much for real estate. It's going to make things look a bit too wide and deceiving, and if you're giving these photos to a realtor, more importantly the people looking at these photos, it's going to really not make the house look real in terms of size. It exaggerates things a bit too much, so it's not a good use case for that. It might not be a bad thing for when you get those super tight small bathrooms and you really need to just get in there and take some form of a photo. I'm not saying don't use it, I'm just saying be sporadic with how you're going to choose and use it. I actually had a lot of fun shooting with this when I was in Louisville with PPA and just using it as like a POV angle. It was the perfect way to get a nice field of view and have some really shallow depth of field and have an S-Log3 image that I can then grade and put on Instagram. Now in terms of the actual lens's design, it is this shiny metallic blue, which doesn't match any Sony body, but I quite like it. You got a massive focus ring on here, which is very grippy, but it's not rubberized. I will say shooting in the cold with this, if you're not wearing gloves, then you're going to feel that pretty quick. Now I will say that this, because it is textured, it does trap dust and dirt, and I've got something in mind and I can't really get it out easily. There is a little rubber gasket on the back there, so I'm assuming weather sealing. Because it's an autofocus lens, you of course have your autofocus manual focus switch, but there is no aperture ring. The lens hood can be removed as well. Now the metal is definitely some form of softer metal, as I've had mine now for probably 3 weeks or so, and it is starting to chip and scratch in certain places. This was a pre-release version, I guess, so I don't know if that's how it will be for the final ones, but just know that the metal does feel a little bit softer. I don't know how easy you'll be able to see that as well, but the paint is starting to come off there just from like wear. This is a fun lens to shoot with because it's such a different look and it is autofocus. It's not what we're used to. It's new. It's rare that we get new lenses these days or new types of lenses. So nice work, Laowa. Thank you for sending that one through. If you want to pick this lens up, it is available in autofocus for both Sony and for Nikon. You can also get it for the other brands as well, but it is only manual focus. There will be links for everything down below. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Take care.